After the longest hiatus yet, it's finally time for the new season. Personally, I don't see what all the fuss is about. I mean, I didn't have any trouble waiting. So first, let's talk about the themes of this episode. Now, there's been a lot of speculation over whether the theme of this episode was going to be communism, whether it was all going to be a big takedown of those darn commies. And I gotta say, when I got wind of that, I was really hoping that wasn't going to be it. I mean, let's face it, at this point, should we have communism is exactly one step above should we have freedom on the list of morally ambiguous conflicts. Yes, you can create a back-and-forth argument around it, but if your only goal is just to disprove communism, then everyone is going to come in and leave thinking the exact same thing. Yes, communism is 100% bad. End of story. So often it seems like a way for writers to have their cake and eat it too, to get praise for taking on deep and complex themes without actually having to say anything all that risky or challenging. So I was happy to see that part 1 wasn't really about disproving the village's lifestyle. In fact, as they showed it to us, they found ways to at least make it seem acceptable. Because as far as we knew, everyone in the village chose to live this way and wasn't trying to force it on anyone else. And even though we don't agree with them, it is technically their right to choose. In fact, as it went on, the episode became less about whether this particular lifestyle was right, and more about whether you could really have a happy and free place in which everyone is in total agreement all the time, whether that really gives you a chance to decide what's best for you. And it began to seem like what they had in mind was conformity more so than communism. Which I like, because that's a much more basic, relatable, and flexible concept as far as what you can apply it to.
No pony left behind!
They so did that on purpose. Actually, if you think about it, this episode is kind of a counterpoint to Rainbow Rocks. You'll remember that the Dazzlings took individuality to an extreme, claiming that your greatest concern when it comes to others should be outdoing them, getting them to admire you, and not the other way around. Now we're looking at how the other extreme can cause a similar sort of problem, and for kind of the same reasons. Nobody is at the exact same level of talent, so if only one level of talent is the correct one, well, there's a lot of people who are going to be getting the short end of the stick. Alright, but how well do they really pull it off overall? Well, the first part laid the groundwork very nicely. It showed us how the town worked and why everyone wanted to live like they did, as well as why the idea didn't sit well with some of our main characters, or why it did in Fluttershy's case. Then we started to look at where this still might not be fair to all of the citizens, since there were characters who missed their special talents and were curious about what life would be like with them back. It seemed like they didn't get enough time to experience the other side of the coin. And they didn't even grow up in this village, which wasn't the case for everyone. So it could have been that groupthink and peer pressure were getting them to make decisions that weren't best for them. But unfortunately, it does kind of pass up its chance to really sink its teeth into these themes. Because yes, it's very easy to disprove your morally ambiguous character when you turn her into a fraud who only partly meant what she said in the first place. I mean, it's not like she's even backed into a corner or something before she turns into Big Brother. She just hits the main six with a surprise attack the first chance she gets and forces them to join. Would she still have been wrong if she was fair and sincere? I guess we'll never know. Actually though, while the episode does become more about the struggle to turn the tables on her after that, it still has a few nice ways of inadvertently exploring the flaws in her plan. For example, I do like that the staff she's using to take away special talents turns out to be a fake, and it was actually just her own magic which she can't use without her own special talents. In other words, there is no divine will for everyone to be like this. To get them to come together and form this cult where they're all content to live the same safe, unchallenged lifestyle, there has to be someone above them organizing it all. Hence it's self-defeating. Although yes, I did catch that Twilight said Eastern magic, and whether they meant that straight up, or they meant that Starlight Glimmer was perverting it, or they meant anything at all by it, I don't know, and I don't really care. So a conflict of morals that makes a couple worthwhile points on the road to defeating the villain. Yeah, I can live with that. So now let's look at the story. Now I've been throwing around the word pacing a lot lately, but truth be told, that's not a self-explanatory term. There's a lot to good pacing. How well you organize your story so that each scene continues to paint an effective picture, how smooth your transitions are, and how much time you spend on each scene, whether you've covered the points in question enough without dragging or rushing. This episode is organized and plotted out pretty well, and nothing really felt forced, which has been a problem in past two-parters. But nonetheless, it is kind of rushed. We left off with these characters at a pretty significant point in their lives. Now that we're returning who knows how much later, you'd think it'd be nice to catch up with them a bit. Just a brief glimpse at how they're taking to life in the new castle as the heroes who saved literally everything. Instead, it's like we're catching them at the beginning of just another day on the job, almost like this could have been just another episode of last season if the one right before it hadn't so happened to be the finale. I mean, notice that when we get to the end for the first time in a two-parter, it doesn't feel like anything all that significant to these characters took place. It feels like we went on just another adventure with them. Also, with little explanation or build-up, the town has a pretty convenient reaction to Starlight Glimmer being exposed. What? Everything I've dedicated my life to for the sake of goodness and happiness has just been undermined? I guess the exact opposite philosophy was right then. Let's get those cutie marks back and take her down! But more than anything, this plays into the final sequence where it's up to 4 new characters to stop Starlight Glimmer from getting away with the cutie marks of our powerless heroes. As Twilight points out, they're returning the favor for exposing Starlight Glimmer's deception, and I do like that. But the problem is, we're just not very invested in them. I mean, yes, we did get to see that they kinda missed their cutie marks, and that they're brave and loyal enough to take a bullet for one another, but all that really does is establish why they and not some other random characters are the chess pieces in play right now. What's going through their minds as they struggle to defeat the villain? Just what is their investment in this? At one point, the episode has a great opportunity to explore that, when one of the heroic newbies is locked up with 5 of the main characters, and they say they're going to show him what good friends they are, even though they're different. Seeing how they do that would be, among other positive things, a great way to get to know this guy and what makes him tick. But then we don't cut back to them until after the captivity is done, and it's just vaguely implied that they did it. So when he shows up at the end as one of our saviors, instead of, alright, now she has to face the guy who was almost too stubborn for the main characters, or was surprisingly funny and clever when they got to know him, or said he's really protective and fond of his best friends, he's just that guy who's on their side now, and does balloon animals. I guess it's implied that Starlight Glimmer's sidekick is there because he wants to undo the harm he's done, but that's ultimately just a guess. It's a shame too, because from the glimpses of personality that we see, it looks like they're all pretty fun and likable. I will give points though for not shying away from Starlight Glimmer trying to straight up brainwash the main characters, and taking the time to show how that works. I mean, that's a legitimately scary concept, and in some ways a very relevant one. And finally, the characters, or at least the ones who stood out. You could make the argument that this episode was actually about Fluttershy, who prefers minimal confrontation and so kinda liked the town at first, but ultimately had to decide where she drew the line.
They've been so welcoming and friendly. Aside from locking us in here and trying to brainwash us into abandoning the things that make us special.
Now, Fluttershy is rarely portrayed as morally skewed without any outside influence. Rightly so, because her lack of a big ego makes her less inclined to do wrong by others. But I definitely think it's important to establish that a mild personality also has its weaknesses where that's concerned. Sometimes a personality more like Rainbow Dash's makes you quicker to stand up for what's right. So I definitely like that how Fluttershy ultimately helps save the day is by taking a stand.
A pony with a different cutie mark in our midst would destroy our entire philosophy. We are all equal here.
But how do you explain this?
And speaking of Rainbow Dash, I did like her as the counterpoint to Fluttershy this time. Being rude, yes, but still pointing out all of the ways that this town doesn't suit someone like her.
They may do things a bit differently than we're used to, but that's no reason to be rude. No, the reason to be rude is that they all keep staring at us.
And though Pinkie Pie wasn't perfect, she did have some pretty good lines. And I do like that she, the smile expert, can sense something off about the town's smiles.
I know smiles, and those smiles, they're just not right.
I pretty much already said what I thought about the new characters, though I will add what most of you are probably thinking about Starlight Glimmer, that they seem to be building her for a return in future conflicts, or at very least in the season finale. While her descent into a total villain doesn't exactly help the moral ambiguity, it does start to paint a picture of what kind of character this is. The implication seems to be that she's been treated like she wasn't good enough in the past, causing her to become a textbook narcissist in the present. Someone who thinks they've got it all figured out in theory, but in practice has a lot of experience being dumped on, and so she's prone to vindictive anger and cruelty when she fails.
You'd all still be living your miserable lives thinking you're better than every pony else if it weren't for my magical abilities. They think they can come to my village and disrupt my life? Let's see how they like spending the rest of their lives without their precious cutie marks.
So how does it stack up to the other two-parters? Well, it's not the best one, so let's start from the bottom, which as far as I'm concerned is the Crystal Empire. Well, Crystal Empire was good at building the stakes and the tension, and truth be told, it was probably the more exciting of the two. But nonetheless, I found Cutie Map more personal and more satisfying, so I'm gonna take its side overall. Next up on the chain is Princess Twilight Sparkle, the thoughtful and bittersweet, but also somewhat tedious and sloppy two-parter. When Princess Twilight sunk its teeth into its theme of going your separate ways as you get older, it definitely hit harder than Cutie Map. But on the other hand, if Cutie Map was rushed, Princess Twilight was downright forced.
Twilight, you can't help us anymore. If we don't kick you out of the rescue mission right now, we'll never be able to play up the message about how we should have treated you like a friend and not a princess. You have to turn back so we won't be able to use our greatest weapon, the elements of harmony. If you keep helping us, you might not be able to perform your duties as princess, such as helping to protect your subjects from dangers exactly like the one we're going after. Okay, what was the argument for this again?
So yeah, Cutie Map was both less and more satisfying than Princess Twilight Sparkle, and overall it pretty much evens out. So I guess I'll call it a tie. And overall, that puts it in 5th. So, all in all, I'd say it was a pretty good start. Fair warning though, they'd better not forget about the Cutie Map until the season finale, because Twilight's brand new purpose in life is not the kind of thing that's only relevant once in a blue moon. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe. If you didn't, send it to one of those darn commies we all hate, and if you'd like to watch another video in this series, click here. Otherwise, just check the description for more links, and I'll see you next time.